It's Josh Wilson. God help us get revolutionary. You're on Vision Christian Radio. It's Neil Johnson with you. It is the Tuesday edition of 2020 and a conversation I think you might like to join into. I know you'll want to lean in a little closer to the radio on some of the things we'll talk about over this coming hour. But you might also be inspired to join in with your own thoughts about what's happening in the workplace. Now, I say that generally, you've got your workplace experience. We might hear from others today about theirs. And we're going to talk about Christians in the workplace and what's happening in the future of our work. You know, technology's been changing so rapidly. Many of our workplaces look very different to what they did just a few years ago. The digital world allows us to work from home. You might be working from home even as you're listening to our conversation today. COVID threw a spanner in the works of traditional workplaces, and since then we've been introduced to a variety of new ideas. You might have heard the terminology quiet quitting or hybrid work. And then there's a push for a 4-day working week. So what does that mean as a Christian believer in the workplace? How do these changes affect our faith and how it functions at work? How do we interact and love the people we work with? And what does it mean for being salt and light and bringing the presence of Jesus into the ever-changing landscape of work? Well, our special guest through this coming hour, Andrew Laird, works with City Bible Forum in Melbourne. He's National Manager of lifeatwork.org.au. It's an initiative aimed at connecting Christian faith with our daily work. He's also the former Dean of the Marketplace Institute at Ridley College, and he's also the author of the book called Under Pressure, How the Gospel Helps Us Handle the Pressures of Daily Work. And so a special welcome back to 2020 to you, Andrew Laird.
Oh, thanks for having me, Neil. It's always wonderful to speak with you and your listeners.
Andrew, let's start talking about the future of work. We've got high inflation, we've got mortgage rates hitting high levels, putting people under pressure. The good thing at the moment is that it seems to be that we've got low unemployment, so there are jobs out there. Some people might be thinking, I don't know if I'll worry too much about this at all, just let it all happen. What are your thoughts for what might be coming this year and the future of our work?
No, it's a great question, Neil. Look, I think perhaps more than many other times, really, in the lives of most of those who be listening today, the workplace and daily work is going through a kind of change or transformation or uncertainty, unlike we've experienced before. And these sort of things were already happening before the pandemic hit, but COVID very much shook things up, perhaps in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetime for most of us. At least that's what many of the experts say, the kind of churn that we're going through at the moment in terms of how we work, where we work, what we do, how long we work for. And then, of course, those other factors that you mentioned just there as well too, the economy and interest rate rises. What will that mean for the work that I do, whether I need to find more work? And so I think that we're in a season of a great deal of uncertainty, and perhaps many of our listeners might be feeling that at the moment too.
How do you think we have changed over these past few years? If you've survived COVID and if your workplace is still intact and maybe there's all sorts of different arrangements these days, how do you reflect on the way that's changed our attitudes to what we do at work?
Yeah, well, you mentioned there in your introduction, Neil, the conversations that have been happening the last year or so around quiet quitting, the great resignation. And certainly one of the big conversations at the moment where I frequently see articles or opinion pieces on is whether we should do a 4-day work week. And I think there's a reason why all of these conversations have come to the fore in the last 12 months and are continuing now, in that I think even before the pandemic hit, many of us felt that there were aspects of work that were broken, that the way that we were having to work, the demands and the pressures that it placed upon us were really unrealistic. And what happened with COVID is it really shook everything up. It almost gave us a blank slate overnight to start from scratch. And people got the opportunity, not in all workplaces, of course, but in many instances, got the opportunity to work differently. And that began these flurry of conversations we're having now about, well, is there a better way of working than the grind that we knew before the pandemic?
So when you say aspects of work broken, now that's actually a pretty significant word to use. Broken, because then we say, well, we better get back to what was the right way of doing it. And maybe there was no right way of doing it. Maybe it's just a transaction that happens between an employer and an employee, and how you've negotiated that to happen to see what is the right way to be at work. Get your insight here, because, is there, some will be reflecting on the good old days when people turned up for work and they gave a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and that's the way it should be. Give us your insights here into broken and what might be an ideal.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Well, there's a sense, Neil, in which, there might have been some glory days of work, but the reality is, if you're thinking about it from a Christian perspective, is that work's been broken right back since the fall. It was there before the fall. It was a good gift that God gave us. But one of the key punishments that comes when humanity sins, right back there in Genesis 3, is an impact upon work. That no longer will it be always fruitful, always abundant, always satisfying, but now we will work by the sweat of our brow, as Genesis 3 talks about. And what I think has been happening in the last few years is that people have been putting enormous expectations and weight upon the potential for work to satisfy them and fulfill them. There's been lots of talk about how I can find meaning and satisfaction and purpose in life through my work. And yet, at the same time as that, there's been aspects of it that we've recognised are broken. The demands, the pressures, the daily commutes, feeling like time is wasted in the office sometimes, or wasted wherever it is that we work, the challenges that we might have with colleagues, or just simply the failure of work to live up to those grand hopes that we might have had for it. So I think every season of work throughout history has had its burdens and its challenges, and COVID has shaken all that up and is making us reflect afresh upon, well, what is the place of work? Have we been putting it in too high a place perhaps in our lives? Where does it sit, and how do we go about doing it in a way that is more fulfilling and more satisfying? And this is where I think the Christian person who has that biblical understanding of work and God's purpose for it can really have a significant contribution to make to that conversation.
So when we're talking hybrid workplaces, and, for listeners, where you get to maybe work from home 2 or 3 days a week, you're in the office for a couple of days a week, or you've got some tech firms that, everyone's working at home 5 days a week. And this is the change, isn't it? And how our work ethic might fit into the new arrangements. Are some people gifted more towards a hybrid work situation, or are there others who perhaps will exploit that? This is the challenge, isn't it, for employers? What are your thoughts around the change that's coming with the work from home hybrid work model?
Yeah, look, Anil, I think if there's ever an opportunity for humanity to exploit things to their own advantage, then they will. But I think that would have been the case whether we were in the office all the time or in a workplace all the time, or whether we're doing hybrid work. It's just a different way of perhaps exploiting things for our own advantage now. So that's obviously a very real challenge. And for the Christian person who's seeking to honour their boss, knowing that ultimately they work for the Lord, they're wanting to be mindful of that and be a person of integrity and trustworthiness. But Neil, to think about it a bit more broadly, I've been reading a number of books over the last 6 months or so on this whole topic of work and hybrid work and how it's changing. And one author in particular, has a very helpful framework for dividing up the workplace today. She talks about 3 types of workers. the learner, the leaver, and the leader. The learner is the person who's kind of new coming into their working life, their career. The leaver is not necessarily those just on the cusp of retirement, but those who have established themselves in their career and moving kind of towards the finishing goal of it. And then, of course, the leader, who's there to direct the learners and the leavers. And the point that she makes is that where you're at, you're going to need and want very different things in terms of, for example, hybrid work. So the learner very much will want to be in the office for the social interaction and to learn by seeing what other people are doing. The leaver, which I guess in my mid-career I'd put myself more in that situation, I'm loving the flexibility of hybrid work, largely because of how that helps with family life and children and all of the different responsibilities there. And so there's a tension here between those who really want to be back there in the workplace and it's advantageous for them too, and for others who want to pull back a bit from it and do the hybrid work, which I think means there's great challenge but also great opportunity for all those people. And particularly I want to think about the Christian leader. How do they love their employees depending on the stage of career they're in?
I love your thoughts about advantages, because sometimes, you can look for all the negatives, but you've just highlighted some significant advantages to the hybrid model. And that is, if you are the sort of person who can be productive for your employer, you can also have this influence on your own family life that was perhaps missing before when you had to be away from the family. Sometimes if you were the traveling salesman, maybe for extended times. So there are advantages in the change. And so it wouldn't be a right thing perhaps to get locked into a negative about change, but actually say, how do we embrace the future? Is that the way you think of looking at the future of work?
Yeah, look, absolutely, Neil. I think change is always challenging for us. Even those who love change is always a hard thing for us to go through as people. Some find it more difficult than others. And so I think we've got to be aware that we are in this time of quite tremendous change, at least in terms of work, and being aware of that for ourselves, but also being aware of that for others. And there are some who are just pining for going back to the way things were before. But I think, to use the expression, the genie is out of the bottle. And the last few years have shown differently. And so it's looking at, well, what are the benefits? What are the positives? What are the advantages of working differently that COVID has exposed to us? But particularly for the Christian person, not just how can I make this work best for myself, but how can I make this work well for others? Or if I'm in a leadership position, how can I make it work well for my employees?
You've got a Life at Work conference that's coming up, and I'll lock into some more details about it, but coming up on Saturday the 18th of February, The Future of Work, How to Love Your Colleagues and Share Jesus in an Ever-Changing Landscape. Some of these sorts of thoughts, no doubt, will come out in various keynote speakers that you'll have there. That's a challenging thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that Life at Work conference coming up Saturday the 18th of February, and you'll be able to lock into that at citybibleforum.org, find out where that's on and how that's all working. We're coming back to continue our conversation. I do want to invite listeners to join into our conversation today. Maybe there's more questions being raised than answers today, but we're speculating about work and our future. 1-800-316-316. Give us your insights. You might even want to just let us know how you're feeling about the changes that are happening. What's happened for you over the past few years? Has there been a major dramatic shift in the way you do work? So 1-800-316-316. Andrew Laird is our guest. We're back with more in a moment. Our talkback line is open. 1-800-316-316. Your thoughts on the future of work. your own experience, what you're seeing, how you might apply your own Christian faith aspects to things that are coming. Our special guest with us this hour is Andrew Laird. Andrew works with City Bible Forum in Melbourne. He's the National Manager of lifeatwork.org.au, and there is a Life at Work conference that's coming up on the 18th of February. Andrew, let me just, I know you well enough now to be able to throw you some hard ones. So get ready for this one here. You said in our opening segment, these changes that are coming give us an opportunity to exploit things for our advantage. And there might be some wisdom in that, because if you're in a bad situation, you've got to make that better. But this, of course, puts us at loggerheads with the employer who is, let me say controversially here, exploiting us for their advantage. So the way we think as Christians about our workplace, give us your insights here into the tension that's there and the sort of thought you might have about looking for a better deal in our workplace. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, Neil, look, there's no question that work can be have some of the greatest moments of joy for us in life. We can celebrate wins, but it can also be, for many people, on any given day, one of the most challenging and difficult parts of their life as well too. Whether it's the lack of work, or as you talk about there, being in a situation where very much you feel abused and exploited by your employer. I would just say in that case that we fortunately live in a country where there is avenues of addressing that and dealing with that to varying degrees. Not all industries, perhaps. There are avenues for seeking recompense or seeing people called to account if they're operating in such a way as that. But that's one, I think, one of the gifts of God that we have when it comes to work, that we do have things in place where we can, if the culture is so toxic as that, to be able to either raise it through formal channels, either internally or externally. And also, and I appreciate this, it's not necessarily the case for everyone, but there are also opportunities to leave and go elsewhere. And so, not for a minute would I want to suggest that anyone should stay in a relationship, really, with their employer that is destructive and harmful and exploitative. Having said that, though, the primary motivation for the Christian person for all of life is to be love. A person of love, loving God and loving neighbour. That's what Jesus says. And so I'm always wanting to think about, well, what does it mean to love God and love my colleagues in the work situation that I'm in? Knowing that, because of the fall, there are always going to be things that they don't like about me and I don't like about them, or I don't like about just the job itself. And so I think we've got to be prepared for that reality of work, but at the same time seeking to navigate it in such a way, well, how can I do the most loving, if you like, of those that I work with? And it may be alleviating some of the tension and troubles and difficulties that they face. Or how can I be the most loving employee and actually make things easier for my boss rather than harder for them? Or vice versa, if I'm in a position of leadership. How do I love my employees and put their interests before my own? So I think love, it has all sorts of implications, particularly for the future of work, as we're uncertain as to what it might hold. Love will set us in good stead, I think, in terms of if that's the way we seek to go into it.
I think you're touching on some really important points here. The thought that if you are a Christian believer and you're in the exploiting workplace, you're seeing that as a toxic workplace. No one you're working with is happy with what's going on. They can all feel their own exploitation in all of that. And here we say, what is it to be a Christian in that environment? And some will say, well, isn't it your first responsibility just to get out of that toxicity and get into something that you like? But is there a sense here, Andrew, if you're in the toxic workplace, may it be even the possibility that you're planted there by God to be salt and light? Thoughts here?
Oh, look, absolutely, Neil. I think the New Testament in particular gives us a number of ways of approaching work or approaching our relationship with the world. And often it would say that leaving is the last resort, because we're called to be salt and light in the world, not apart from it. And look, if we leave one place, because it's not working out brilliantly for us, the reality is there's going to be challenges the next place as well too. Now, I just want to reaffirm what I said a moment ago, that if we are in such an abusive and toxic and destructive workplace, that we shouldn't feel an obligation that we must stay in that. But you're right, God very often has called us into the world where there is messiness, and part of what his call upon us might be is to how can I seek to bring some real good out of the challenges of this workplace that I find myself in, and bring my Christian faith and that priority of service and love for others to bear upon this. I often think of the words of Mordecai to Esther, where he says, maybe God has put you here in the palace for such a time as this. There may come 1, 2, 3 occasions throughout your working life where you realise, hang on a second, God has put me in this place for such a time as this, to call to account perhaps some aspect of darkness or injustice or inequality that is being perpetuated by my workplace. And I'm the person God has called to speak up in this moment.
So there's the employee perspective, how you might help your work colleagues stand up and stand strong in amongst a toxic workplace. Let's put the shoe on the other foot here. If you are the business owner, or if you are a department leader, manager, and all of a sudden the shoe is on your foot and you're leading what is a toxic workplace, biblical principles here that might help to bring some sort of alleviation of some of the toxicity. Any thoughts here, Andrew?
Yeah, look, Neil, and I can speak about this from my own personal experience. Not that I did it, but I had a Christian boss who did this for me. And that this particular boss always put himself in between his employees and any potential harm that was coming down from higher levels of management, placing himself in the way of harm so that he took the hit, so to speak, so that his employees didn't. And it was a powerful witness. He was a wonderful boss to work for. The employees knew that he was doing this for them, but it was a real demonstration of his Christian faith, in particular, the way in which he believed in and followed a God who, if you like, if I can put it this way, took a hit for him, namely on the cross, taking the punishment that he deserved. And so out of the overflow of that, he wanted to be the kind of person who stood in the way of harm, protecting his employees from that. And so he weathered all sorts of challenges, and sadly, in the end, management got rid of him because they recognised that he was a stumbling block to what they wanted to bulldoze through. But the fact is, for a long time, he was there like a shelter almost for those who came under him. And I think that attitude of service and sacrifice and considering the needs of those who I am responsible for, greater than myself, even potentially at personal cost to myself, is how this can work itself out in the life of the Christian employer.
So you've got these biblical principles, and sometimes we actually boil those down to very simplistic ways, and we give them rules of thumb. We say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We've got the golden rule, and it was given to us by Jesus, and it's got powerful impact in the workplace. And these sorts of things, if I'm going to consider others more highly than myself, and I'm going to be doing that as the boss, as you're saying, taking a hit for the employees who are below you, that's an expression there that's going to win some fans, and it's going to actually make your toxic workplace a little bit easier to live in. Hey, we're going to break for news and we're going to continue our conversation after Vision National News. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. What are your thoughts about work, your own experience? You're welcome to call in and be part of our conversation. Our special guest is Andrew Laird. Andrew works with City Bible Forum in Melbourne. They've got their Life at Work conference that's coming up. You'll find the details at citybibleforum.org. We're back with more after news. Wonderful to have you with us. It is the Tuesday edition of 2020, and if you're just joining us, joining into what I think is an important and fascinating conversation about the future of work and what it is to be a Christian, thinking about the future of the workplace. Technology's been changing so rapidly, many of our workplaces look very different to what they did just a few years ago. The digital world allows many of us to work from home. COVID threw a spanner in the works of traditional workplaces, and since then we've been introduced to a whole bunch of new ideas. Things like the push for a 4-day working week. We're yet to talk about that. You might have your own perspective. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. We've been talking about hybrid work. We might talk a little more about quiet quitting. There's something in that so far as our attitude goes. So what does it mean for Christians in the workplace, and how do these changes affect how faith functions at work? How do we interact? How do we love the people we work with? And what does it mean for being salt and light and bringing the presence of Jesus into the ever-changing landscape of our work? Andrew Laird is our special guest. He works with City Bible Forum in Melbourne. He's the national manager of lifeatwork.org.au, an initiative aimed at connecting Christian faith with our daily work. And they've got a Life at Work conference coming up, Saturday the 18th of February. The title of that conference is The Future of Work, How to Love Your Colleagues and Share Jesus in an Ever-Changing Landscape. Well, our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. And Andrew, before we take things a little further and a little deeper, why don't we take a call from a listener? Michelle is in Kempsey in New South Wales. Hello, Michelle. Welcome.
Hi, Howie. Thank you very much. How are you?
What are your thoughts, Michelle?
Hello?
Yes, are you there?
My thoughts. Yeah, so I've just been listening to, I just randomly turned on the radio, and once again, the Lord is speaking to me in many ways. So I can hear, like, what you're saying was totally relevant for what's happening to me at the moment. And it's, like, not so much in the workplace. However, I will relate it to the workplace because I believe, like, when you're saying there's, people are now working at home and there's not it's a different type of workplace now. Like I used to work in an organisation that it was like nobody speaks up. People are scared to speak up. People are scared to stick up for people, and because they don't want to lose their jobs. And I think that the fact that people are working from home now, which has been, I feel like it's all in a way of like the devil working in a way, because I think the people in power are actually given more power in a way because they don't have that. They're not able to be challenged in a way that you can challenge people in front of the whole of the workplace. And I don't know whether I can go back to work in a place like I used to work at, because it's very toxic and people are too scared to do anything other than follow the norm, and follow what they're like.
Okay. Michelle, you're making some really important points here, and what I can hear you saying is that fear is a dominating force in the workplace, and sometimes that fear is coming from the employer. There might be other bullying factors in the workplace too, but let's get a thought or two from our guest, Andrew Laird. Your thoughts for Michelle in Kempsey.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think Michelle describes something that's probably a common sentiment for many people, that they feel that kind of fear around some of the challenges of work as well too. And so there's, first of all, a sense in which that's very, very normal and not surprising, sadly so. And again, this is coming back to because of the fall and work not being as the way God intended it for us to be. There's a number of things, and we've talked about being the person who might speak up and be placed there by God, like Esther in the palace for such a time as this. But I think we need great wisdom to know whether we're there for that reason or not. And so that's why I think it's so important that we have both prayer and Christian community as we seek to navigate these challenges of the work life. God, in his great wisdom, has made us part of a body. And I really think we should lean into, if you like, or call upon that body that we're a part of to help us navigate these challenging and difficult situations. Sometimes someone who's outside of the situation can speak afresh into it and have eyes to see things in a way that we can't. Whether that's them saying, actually, you know what, that's fairly normal. I think you're just going to have to, deal with that. And here's some ways that you can potentially navigate that as a Christian person. Or someone who might say that is really bad. Either you need to speak up, and this is the way you might seek to go about that, or actually you need to leave. And of course, having that all guided by prayer and the Holy Spirit is essential, but having our brothers and sisters in Christ helping us navigate the current and potentially future challenges is really important.
And Michelle in Kempsey, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1-800 316 316. You might like to join into our conversation. Interesting that the way we see things at work, we might be fearful, and some people more fearful than others. Some in their younger years, less mature. So as you mature and you find out what's expected and know what your rights are, then you might be less fearful in the workplace. This tension between employers and employees. Sometimes the employees just cannot speak up for themselves. And therefore you have trade union representatives who are in the workplace too and protecting workers' rights, pushing for that wage increase that you're too fearful to ask about yourself. There is certainly room for all of these mechanical elements of how our workplace can function. Thoughts here around alleviating fears and having others who can stand up for you? Thoughts here, Andrew?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Neil. And I think, again, that in God's kindness, we have those resources available to us, and it's not wrong or to seek to utilise them. If there are injustices that are being perpetrated against ourselves or others, that we want to seek to appeal to those avenues to address those injustices. I think a point that you just made that's very important is that depending on our stage in career, this can be a very challenging thing, or it might be an easier thing. And related to that, I keep on mentioning, the example of Esther for such a time as this. I think we need great wisdom to know as to whether it is for such a time as this that God has put us there to address something. I think some people might see Esther moments, if you like, every single day of the week, but they're probably fewer and further between than that. And so we need that wisdom that comes from the wider Christian community and from the Holy Spirit guiding us to know, is this a moment to speak up? Is this a moment to be silent?
It's one thing to be militant. It's one thing to be a rebel worker, and you're probably best to try and get on with the boss. But let's come back to some of these things that we mentioned in the introduction. Quiet quitting, as some say, the great resignation, doing the minimum requirement for one's job and putting in no more time or effort than you really have to. We touched on hybrid work. I do want to hear your thoughts on a 4-day week and the push towards that. But just touching quickly back onto the attitude that we might have in our workplace. That's going to make us attractive as an employee. It's going to make your potential employees attractive if you are the employer at getting that right attitude. Thoughts here around this thing that seems to have gripped so many people, the quiet quitting attitude. Thoughts here, Andrew?
Yeah, look, Neil, as we were saying earlier in the first half an hour, that love is really to be the guiding motivation and ethic, if you like, for the Christian person when it comes to all of life, not least of all their work life, putting the interests of others before ourselves, loving God, loving neighbour. And so that obviously has implications for this whole idea of quiet quitting. And I understand the rise in prominence of people talking about quiet quitting, because it is the case that for so many years, people have felt like they have been abused and misused by their employer. and people are saying enough is enough. And so I appreciate that sentiment. And there is a rightness, if you like, as we've been talking about, of pushing back against where there is an injustice. However, a lot of the commentary around quiet quitting, I think, has a very selfish attitude to it, in that I'm just going to do what works for me and what is good for me. And that is, of course, profoundly at odds with the gospel and the attitude that the Christian person is to have. And so I think if the temptation for that quiet quitting is there for us because we feel ourselves being abused and used by our employer, the attitude is not, the approach is not necessarily the quiet quitting, but to be speaking up about it, both for our sake and for the sake of our colleagues. Acknowledging that, having conversations with that about it, rather than trying to subvert, the culture there by just refusing to pull my weight, and inevitably actually making things more difficult for those you work with as well too, which is also unloving for them.
Andrew, a scripture from Colossians chapter 3, and this one's an important one, I think, when we talk workplace and the way we perform, the way our attitude is shaped. It says, as Paul wrote, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Something there in the sentiments Paul is relaying that says, the attitude of the Christian believer is a little different to the very secularized, non-godly employee. Any thoughts here around the advantage of having God as your master, even above your employer?
Yeah, it's so important for us to remember that, Neil, that even the best earthly boss is still going to be flawed. And so recognizing that we work ultimately for God, who is the perfect boss, who will reward us perfectly and fairly, or even if unfairly, if you like, giving us what we don't deserve because of Christ. I think that can be a powerful motivation in terms of how we work. And you'll notice that Paul says there to work hard as though working for the Lord, which indeed we are. And so that challenges the quiet quitting idea of, well, I'm just going to, be lazy and slack and unreliable. But for the person who might have a tendency towards overwork, we need to hear that that's not a call to burning yourself out, because God equally says you need to rest and step back from work and trust me to provide. So we're to work well, we're to work with integrity, we're to work hard, using all the gifts that God has given us, stewarding them well, but not in such a way that we are so driven and burnt out that we don't also recognise God's provision for us ultimately.
Talking about being burned out, I've got some friends who work a 9-day fortnight, and now you've got people talking about working a 4-day working week. And we might all speculate here, how do we as Christians think about a push for a 4-day week? Is it based on the thought that I want to do less? Maybe there's a lazy attitude in that. There might be another attitude in there that might be a good stewardship so far as time with family. But what are your thoughts around a 4-day working week, Andrew?
Yeah, look, Neil, this is not one where it's black and white, it's right or wrong, but it's a wisdom thing. And again, coming back to what we were saying earlier, that these kind of things are being discussed now because COVID has shook everything up. And so we're asking those questions about the nature of work and how long we might need to work for. And what many people have realised is that sometimes if we have portions of time at home, we can be far more productive. We can work at the hours and the times of the day that work best for us if we're in a job that allows for that. And increasingly, I think many employers are recognising that certainly in the area of knowledge work, that's the kind of work that's not very well measured in terms of hours on the job, but rather the outcomes. And so I might have a task to do that's going to take me 12 hours, or I might have a task that's going to take me 2 hours. really the output is the priority, not necessarily the clocking on and clocking off for a certain number of hours of the week. Hence the conversation about, well, whether a 4-day week might actually make us more productive, might make for better rhythms, better quality of life for people. The nature of the tasks that we've got to do can be done in that portion of time. And so I think it's good that we're having these conversations. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, and so we need wisdom for it. And I think the Christian person who might be in those workplaces that are having these conversations about, do we work 5 days or 4 days or 6 days or whatever the case may be? Do we work all the time at home or all the time in the office? Again, love's the guiding principle for them here, and seeking not what's best for themselves, but what works well for others, and not even just their immediate colleagues, but also in terms of the good that their work is seeking to do in the world. And they're making those decisions of how, where, and when we work based on that.
You've got your Life at Work conference coming up Saturday, 18th of February. The title, The Future of Work, How to Love Your Colleagues and Share Jesus in an Ever-Changing Landscape. If we're looking for ways that you can, a rule of thumb here, something to take away from a conversation like this, how do you bring us to a point where we say, well, this is the way we have to change in order to navigate forward in our workplaces? How do you describe that? And I no doubt people will want lots of detail and they'll want to be part of your Life at Work conference. But how do we sort of simplify some things and as a takeaway for today's conversation, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't want to sound like a broken record, Neil, but really in many ways it's considering the needs of others before myself. And so that relates to both how I love my colleagues. And so a practical example in terms of we've been talking about the place that we work, hybrid work, home or the office, it may mean that in instances we will do what is best for the person that I work with rather than myself in terms of the place that I work for that day. Even if it might be inconvenient for me to go into the office for the sake of the other, perhaps for the sake of the younger employee who can learn better and develop their skills quicker by having me present with them rather than on a screen far away, then I'll do that, even if it's less convenient for me than it is for them. Or in that idea of sharing Jesus and wanting to speak with colleagues about the love that we know in Christ. Many Christians I know have found that hard in recent years as they've been working remotely, and they don't have the incidental conversations that they did anymore. And so at the conference, we're going to share some great stories of people who've been very creative in seeking to develop and deepen relationships for the sake of the gospel with their colleagues. And again, in order to do that, that might come at a cost to ourselves, putting ourselves out there, creating opportunities to have deeper interactions with colleagues in order to be able to love them and share Jesus with them.
And things becoming uncertain for some, and sometimes that affects the way we even think about our own aspirations, our careers, our families. And so because things are uncertain, we don't make our own solid plans based on the things as they look to us. How important is it here? And let's get a little spiritual here, because there's a song we play on the radio here, and it says, I don't know what the day may bring, but I know who brings the day. When you have a relationship, faith in God, that He's the one who has our future in His hands, how much of a difference does that make when we're facing the uncertainty that we might have for our careers and our workplace?
Yeah, look, Neil, that's a wonderful note to finish on. In fact, one of the key areas where I'll be looking to go in the conference, in the talks that I'll be giving there, and that is that there is great uncertainty about all of life. We've been talking about work today, but it's obviously true across the board. But there's a lot of uncertainty around work at the moment too, and these conversations are going to keep bubbling along for a little while still. And for some people, that can be exciting. For other people, that can be daunting. Throw into the mix, as you were saying at the beginning, the economic challenges that many are facing. the prospect of more interest rate rises as this year progresses. And so what a wonderful thing it is that we can rest in the God who knows the past, the present, and the future. I draw great comfort from that as I look down the barrel of uncertainty in terms of what's work going to look like for me? Will I have work? Where might work take me? And if it takes me elsewhere, what might that mean for the people in my life? What a wonderful comfort it is that we should be calling upon and drawing upon each and every day, that we know the God of the universe who made the universe and who sustains it, and who ultimately has our best at heart and will work all things for our good. It doesn't mean the future won't be difficult, but that we can be sure that in the midst of that, he is with us in it and working it for our good. And so I'd want to encourage people to just keep clinging to that truth and reminding brothers and sisters in Christ of that truth, particularly as we perhaps seek to navigate ongoing uncertainty.
Well, you've strategically timed your Life at Work conference that's coming up on Saturday, the 18th of February, at the beginning of a working year and in a very significant year. We've been talking marriage and money in the conversation before us. Now we're talking what's happening at work in a very uncertain year, 2023. The cost of living increases, mortgages, there's finance pressures in our workplaces. There's estimates there could be 100,000 job losses with the way that interest rates and mortgages are rising into the times to come. So strategically timed, the Life at Work conference. Now, City Bible Forum, just a fabulous organisation. You've got bases in capital cities all around Australia. I know you're encouraging people to be a part of this conference that's coming up, and they can do that on a live stream. You're even encouraging people to attend hubs for a watch party. Now, is this something you do individually? Could you take your whole workplace to a watch party and do something like this? Would that be an advantage? Give us some insight here about how you best get the real. How do you get the treasure out of the conference that's coming up?
Yeah, look, Neil, like we've been talking about, the conference was also hybrid because of the last couple of years. It'll be live on that Saturday, but we want people to gather together with others ultimately, because we think things are best done in fellowship and in community and relationship with others. And so really you can join the conference from wherever you are, as long as you've got an internet connection. But we've got these hubs, as you mentioned, in 5 of the capital cities around Australia, where you can go along and join with others. Or you can host your own watch party, whether it's in your home or a local church or some other space, wherever you like. And yeah, bring your whole workplace along if you like. If you've got a Christian group that gathers at work, get all together at someone's home and you can enjoy the day together with others, because we think the best encouragement comes as we do this with one another.
Some might think it's dreary to go to a conference to talk about work because, hey, we're wanting something exciting. But this might well be the best foundation you can lay for a tough year ahead. And so for listeners to think through that issue, let me give you the website, citybibleforum.org, and you'll be able to connect with Andrew Laird. Citybibleforum.org. And is there a special website at all for the conference? I think that is where you'll find the link, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, if you head to that page, it's the first thing you'll see on the screen currently.
Life at Work Conference 2023. You'll find it, citybibleforum.org. And Andrew Laird works with City Bible Forum. And he also is National Manager of lifeatwork.org.au, and he's written a book called Under Pressure, How the Gospel Helps Us Handle the Pressures of Daily Work. Keep an eye on that too when you're on the City Bible Forum website, or you might want to just Google that book and get a hold of it as well. Andrew Laird, time has run out, but I want to thank you so much for sharing your deep insights with us today around work and the future. Appreciate you being with us on 2020.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Neil.